Alright, ladies and gentlemen, it's conversation time. So I've just recorded a new video showing how to use AI tools like Midjourney to assist with creative workflows in Blender. So the examples that I gave were things like making graffiti without actually having to do graffiti art. You could also use it for things like generating fingerprints, which is something that Tom, CG Matter, has experimented with recently. And I also used it for doing semi-procedural materials. So that's for like creating somewhat believable materials using general prompts. So I was using Coral, like, to see what the AI would come up with. And it makes some semi-organic shapes, which I thought look quite interesting, and you can layer them together to make even more complex materials. But you know, experimenting with all of this stuff does raise a series of questions about how far is this going to go? What is this going to do in terms of jobs for other artists? How is it going to integrate into like regular pipelines and workflows? Is it something to be afraid of, or is it something to be encouraged by? Will it have a lifespan? Will it kind of have a bubble that bursts, a bit like NFTs? Gleb Alexandrov did a video about Midjourney recently as well, and I left a comment telling him that it was a nice video, and he said, "What excites, and in brackets terrifies me the most, is the projection of text to images into the future, 3D and beyond. Will we see the 3D scenes / levels generated in a similar way?" That was actually quite interesting, because when I put something on my Instagram story saying that I was experimenting with this AI artwork, I got a message from Cloud, who was behind one of the Blender splash screens. You should recognize it if I hold it up to the screen. See if that can focus, this one there. Saying that they'll be interested in seeing like how this develops for 3D scenes. So I shared one of my opinions. So one of my opinions about like AI in 3D going forward, and this is not technically correct because there are so many ways to do it, but one of my opinions is that it will be point based. What I mean by that is like AI tools are not really like, they're not really intelligent systems, they're not conscious, they're not sentient. They're just pattern recognition tools more than anything. Like really, really good pattern recognition tools. The thing is, to recognize patterns, it's most effective when the patterns can be read simply. So in the way of 2D images, it's just pixels on a screen. Now this is combined with other contextual information which comes along with it. Now the contextual information is what helps it to understand what a pattern is, or what type of patterns are more likely to represent what semantics, I should say. So the data set built around that needs to consider those semantics, but realistically the data at its core fundamental level should be simple. It's something that everything can be built around, and pixels is quite a simple data type. With 3D, things are a little bit tricky because when we think about what's the simplest data type, well, vertices, that's the simplest data type, but not really. Like if you're trying to make something 3D, like a mesh, it's a polygon, and that requires 3 vertices. And here's the thing, when you're constructing polygons, they need to be absolute, they need to be accurate, they need to have accurate indices when you're constructing the meshes in code. So you need to make sure that when you're trying to generate like a data set using this and create feedback, so actually generating new mesh content, it needs to be absolute and needs to be able to create, doesn't necessarily need to be manifold geometry, but it needs all indices to be completely accurate to create the right geometry. I think that's the trickier part. That's the part of it which is more complex above pixel level stuff. So I don't know like how viable that is. I'm pretty sure, well, Cloud let me know that NVIDIA's been working on something like that kind of does that, with like a kind of AI photogrammetry type thing. But my theory is that kind of the entryway into 3D for AI is point-based techniques. So what I mean by that is, when you're building a data set for AI stuff, you need to build up like a massive sample of content. I think that points are quite easy to get from mesh content. They're literally just like points in transform 3D space. Now scaling is a problem, right? Because if the meshes are scaled differently, especially across like softwares and files and stuff, that's going to kind of make things very confusing. So it needs to be done in like a relativistic way rather than like an absolute scale way. Anyway, points are easy to sample from any pre-existing mesh. Okay, just how we're seeing like these Poisson distributions and regular points on the surface of meshes in geometry nodes, I think the same thing can be kind of similar. So you can get a distribution around meshes, and that describes the shape of the 3D mesh. So that means you can take mesh content from like any generation of 3D graphics, pass it through a certain processor with like a consistent distribution for getting points, and then you're essentially teaching the AI system what shaping is taking its own interpretation of it through a point distribution. So you're passing like every possible mesh you can, hopefully with some contextual information, and it's applying it with like the same resolution of a point scan to kind of figure out, okay, well, these are the shapes for this type of content, if that makes sense. Now you don't have to do like the consistent point resolution that way. You could, if you wanted, just take the vertex data straight from meshes, and I feel like that would be more appropriate for doing like, or for trying to get the feedback of harsh, like hard surface outlines. So for example, if you imagine like a cone, like like imagine like a rocket, like a chemical rocket's cone sticking out the bomb, you know what I mean? Like it's got like this harsh shape, like it thins out very quickly. Now, if you were kind of modeling that manually, there'd be a very precise and well distributed circumference of vertices all on the same level. Okay, now that's essential for doing hard surface modeling, and that's essential for like, you know, subdivision surface workflows. So in a case like that, you would want the actual vertex data already there to become like part of the data set. And that's not really going to be viable if you're doing like this consistent resolution point scan of meshes, because you're going to get like random mixes and distributions around harsh edges like that. Yeah, it really depends on like what kind of technique you're going to use to build up the data set. But I'm not an expert in any of that stuff. These are just, you know, some ideas that I thought of, and like that's my prediction. But obviously I don't know too much, and I haven't even looked into NVIDIA's system, so they've probably come up with something like way better. And from the looks of it, 2 Minute Papers has also done a video on it, so this will be interesting to see. So in this case, I think it has like an image target, and it's trying to like grow geometry to the target or something like that. That's pretty cool actually. And it could be interesting that like a combination of different techniques can be used together, and like I guess different assessments of the same data set to try and make something more accurate as well, which I guess is in a way what rendering already is like. And what I mean by that is like rasterization engines, we can enhance them with path trace techniques to get more accurate results. You know, it could totally be the case that the same thing could happen to like any kind of technique like this, making different kinds of assessments powered by like AI deep learning techniques to try and get more accurate results. Like there's no just one specific technique. Who knows? I don't know. Like I want to learn more about it. But let's talk about, I guess, some more kind of interesting questions. So should artists be afraid of AI technology? You know, I'd like to say no, but I would say maybe some artists. It just depends how accessible it gets, right? Because you know when you go to like hotels and stuff, and it's got like this cheap artwork littered around the rooms. I don't know if you've ever thought this, but sometimes I look at that and I think, okay, well, who actually makes these? Like, they're not all bad. Like some of them are quite nice, but like, where do they come from? Is there just like a mass-produced factory of like these artworks to all the hotels buy up, or like they're just randomly printed off? But I think cases like that, where there's just filler artwork required, something like these AI art generators are just perfect for that, because they can get something that probably looks better in just like a fraction of the time, and like every single one of them could be unique. But just like imagine if someone's entire job is making artwork for those types of hotels, for that example, like then yes, they should be afraid. But then again, like talking about the accessibility, who says the people that source artwork for the hotels actually know anything about like computer tech, or would even understand what the AI systems are, or would even like have that accessibility? Then there's also the question of, well, even if this technology is available and people can take advantage of it, would they really want to? Like maybe they enjoy the process of getting real artwork, and maybe there'll be a stigma around it at some point in the future, you know, like there's a stigma around NFT content. But one thing I found like exciting with playing with the tools is I can feed in my own artwork as like a seed that the AI tool will take inspiration from, and then I can give it a prompt and it's going to consider my artwork and make something new inspired by that. And I think that's really cool, because that kind of helps artists become their own source of inspiration. So even using it like that, it kind of means that I'm not necessarily using the AI results, but I'm using it to help me develop like ideas, kind of saturate my mind with my own style. And I think that's kind of cool. Can also be used in some cases to generate very good outputs for like artistic resources. So like I said, like patterns and graffiti and stuff like that, we could totally like clean those up and package those up as artistic resources. Is that something that people would buy? If it seems low effort and that it's just been made and thrown into a pack, then maybe not. But if there's like a curation element to it, where you know that only the good ones have been picked, and maybe they've even been prepared for certain files, certain scenes, certain softwares, then maybe that adds an extra sense of value to it. What about overpaints and stuff? Well, I think that's all right, like, but I always have this feeling, you know, it has to be significantly different. What's the story? Story is such an important thing for me, and I didn't even have time to like mention that in my main video. But while you're here, let's talk about story, because this is, whenever people have asked me about, you know, like AI type stuff, NFT type stuff, it was specifically with NFTs, what makes artwork valuable? In my mind, it's story. Story can be explicit or implicit. So basically, if you're making a piece of artwork, if you spend ages making it, if it's got complexity, if it took a lot of thought, there is a lot of story behind that. If you just opened up a file, pressed a button, which generated a piece of artwork, and then saved that, there's no story. Like, the story is, I pressed a button. That's awful. Like, that's a really crummy story, and that's what a lot of the NFT was. I pressed a button, it generated 1,000 variants. What kind of story is that? Now, a lot of story can be implicit, because, like, you know, people share artwork on Twitter, Instagram, Reddit, like every other website, and we understand like the effort that goes into making that. So it's an implicit story, it's implied. So like when someone posts like a really cool result of something they've made in a Blender file, that carries along with it an implicit story, because we all already understand like the amount of skill that went into making that. We know like the years of training and practice that must have gone into it. We know like all the technical aspects of how that might have been made. So there's an implicit story which is impressive, and so we appreciate it more. With NFTs, a lot of us like technical heads who aren't crypto bros, we look at some of that content and we think, we know that took like no effort to make. Not all NFTs, of course, like there are some very genuine, awesome ones, like which are genuine pieces of artwork, but the generative ones, you know what I mean? It's like, okay, that took no effort. And I'm even thinking about mine. So when people took my resources without commercial rights and then went and made NFTs from them, I am the only person in the world that knows exactly like what effort went into making that. Exactly. Because I know the files like the back of my hand because I made them. And I look at that and I think, well, what a crap story that is, like when compared to really amazing artworks. So anyway, the whole point about this is, when looking at AI artwork, do I think it's a good idea to use the AI artwork in your own artwork? Story, I think it depends on the story, right? So if you're just generating a piece of artwork and throwing that out there, I think that's crap, okay? Like, that's all you did. You gave it a prompt, you saved it, you put it out there, well done, what a fantastic story. Like, it's no different from all the other like prompts being made. But if you've used it effectively, at like the beginning, the middle, or the end of your workflow, then that's a lot more interesting. For example, if you use the AI tool to give yourself like a wide variety of inspiration, then you used one of those inspiration pieces and then made the scene that it was describing yourself. Like you went through the entire process, the skill process of making it. That's a really cool story. Like you were inspired by it, you went through all this effort, you created something amazing from it. Bingo. Okay, so what about the middle? Let's say you got part of the way through making a scene and it's good, but it's like it's not what you want it to be like. So you take a render of it, you pass it through the AI tool, and it gives you directions, right? So you've already done some of the legwork, but now it's giving you directions. And then you take one of those directions and you use it as inspiration to carry on. Or maybe even you take that as your render and then you kind of do overpaints over the top of it, that's okay. But like there's effort before and there's effort afterwards. And I feel like that's also a really good use case for it, because there's an entire story there as well. You've put your own effort in, you've used it to enhance your workflow, and you've added some afterwards as well. And then the last use case for it would be, what if you did all of the work, right? All of the work in building the scene, and then you gave it to an AI afterwards, but you specifically told the AI to give maximum weight, so like maximum inspiration to your render, and then it makes some variations, and then you take one of those and use that as your artwork. I still think that's okay, so long as it gives like heavy weight to your render, so it's not just bringing in random crap to try and make it look cool. Because in these AI tools, you can actually specify the weight of the input image. What I mean by that is it's like how much it's going to be inspired by the image you provide. So in that case, like I think you've done all the work. You've created something amazing, and now you're just letting the AI play with it a bit, like, you know, just to jazz it up. And I don't think that's functionally much different from doing post-processing. This is like a new form of post-processing. So those are like a few examples. We've got something where like your inspiration starts at the beginning and then you do work. You've done something where you do some work, you take more inspiration, then you finish it off. And then we've done it where you've done like all the legwork and then you get it to post-process for you. I think all of those cases are okay because they all develop story. So I think that's like the key point behind it. That's why I hate a lot of NFT content. And that's why I hate a lot of already created AI art content, because there's no story behind a lot of it. But I think there could be story behind a lot of it. It just takes the right kinds of artists. And to be honest, I feel like this is something that people already understand, they just might not have a way to articulate it. Like it's the whole low effort question about NFTs. A lot of us understood that a lot of the NFTs were low effort. And I mean like a lot of people, but I think low effort is just another way of saying no story had been made for this. Like no time was invested, there were no decisions made. So yeah, I just like, that's how I think about it. Is there story? Yes, but like there's enough way that art stories can be implicit. So for example, if an amateur artist draws a line on a page, right, grabs a pen or a paintbrush and just does one line, that's terrible artwork, right? But if the world's most famous, most popular artist with like an intense history in artwork grabs the same brush or pen and then also draws a line, that one has more value to it. A lot of people think that's crazy, and I'm kind of on the fence about it, but I mean, I don't really think it's crazy, because part of the implicit story of artwork is the person that creates it. right? Because your entire history leading up to this point is part of the story of the artwork. Like, I don't think it's like this disconnected thing where the art is living on its own separate timeline from you. I think you are part of the art process. You are part of that coming to life. So I think there is an implicit difference between like a new artist doing a line on a page and a seasoned artist doing a line on a page. I think one does inherently have more value. So story can be implicit in more than just the artwork itself. There is also like the hidden skill level behind learning how to dictate these tools, because I don't want to be too kind of egotistical, but I think I've come up with some like really cool results and use cases in like my first few hours using it than a lot of other people that I've seen. And like some other seasoned artists as well using these AI tools. I think it takes like a certain amount of creativity and technical knowledge to know how to direct it and use it in like the cool ways. And so there's an intelligence barrier there that I don't think people just get that from using the tools. I think there's still skills which need to be learned in how to utilize them. So it's like a managerial standpoint. So considering all of those things, I would say that no, probably not worth being completely afraid of these AI tools. I think they're really good enhancers. I just think we're getting more use cases faster than we would expect to get them. And I think that's scary because it means that there's a lot to learn very quickly. And that if you don't learn it, you might feel like you're being left behind, like there's a fear of missing out element. So like I've only experimented with 2 use cases in Blender. I know there are hundreds more. And I am afraid because like, I don't think I'm going to get around to looking at all of them. And maybe I'll feel left behind, like if I don't talk about them and then someone else does it and they do it amazing and I feel like, oh, why didn't I do that, you know? So I think there are a lot of people feeling that. They don't want to jump on because they're afraid of how much it could do for them. Like that's another kind of, I think, an unspoken thing. Because I kind of felt that way. Like before touching like Midjourney, I wanted to try it, but I thought, you know what, I know this is going to be good, but everyone's already jumping on it and it's kind of already starting to feel too mainstream and like, I don't know, I'll just stick to doing my own thing first. And then when the time comes, I'll make my mark on it. But then Donna, lovely Donna, good friend of mine, she gave me an invite because I think she knew like what would happen if she put it in my hands. And she was like, you better do a video about it. And I was like, yeah, we'll see. And then I played with it and I was like, yeah, I'm going to do a video about it. So yeah, I don't know, like these are just my mixed thoughts about it. I think it's cool. And I think this is different from the NFT stuff because this is an actual cool tool. It's like, it's a supplement for workflows and pipelines. I think it's going to be a massive assist in certain artistic workflows. Not all artistic workflows, that's for sure. And like we said, there are lots of caveats. I think that there's going to be a lot of opportunity for people to neglect story. And I also don't like the idea of people being misled because I have already seen that happening on Reddit and it pees me off, where people are just uploading AI art and other people don't know. Like, I can tell there's no story behind it, all right? But they can't tell because they don't know about the AI stuff. So I would like there to be kind of an easier way to recognize the difference between the two. So I kind of came up with an idea for maybe having like a kind of icon that regular artists can put on their artwork to say this was completely handmade, like no AI art whatsoever. And it would literally just be like a very small icon of a hand, like a palm, something like that, you know, that you could put on your artwork and go handmade. So someone immediately knows there's no AI art intervention whatsoever. So I'll keep thinking about that idea. But yeah, like let me know what you think because I'm super interested. Like I really want to know. And if you made it this far through the video, just like my main channel one, which may or may not be up by the time this goes up, the emoji is going to be a robot. Of course, that seems really appropriate. So thanks for watching everyone. Stay safe and yeah, have a great day.